everybody, welcome back to my channel and to another episode in our sketchbook series where I'm going to be going through a watercolor tutorial on how to paint this beach scenery. And I'm going to try and simplify it as much as I can so that this is a great tutorial for you guys that are beginners with watercolors. So anyway, let's get into it. As always, the materials that I am using for this tutorial will all be listed in the description, but don't worry if you don't have the exact materials that I'm using or the exact colours, it really doesn't matter, just use what you have. I'm starting off by using a kneaded eraser to lighten up my sketch outline. I'm going to start off by mixing the colour that we're going to be using for the sea. And I'm just going to use two colours for this. I'm using a turquoise blue, so a really nice bright blue, and a bit of a bright green. And now for the colour of the sky, I'm going to be using more of a bluey purple tone. So I've got these two different blues so that the two different areas, the sky and the sea, stand out and look different and look separate to each other. Now I'm going in with some water and I'm pre-wetting where the sky and the sea is. So pretty much just the top half of our painting. So once you've wet the surface of the paper, it's time to paint in the sea. And so I'm just taking the colour that we mixed up first and I'm just spreading this where the sea is. And I'm making sure that I get a nice even layer. And because the surface of the paper is wet, we won't have a harsh edge where the sea meets the sky. Now I'm going in with that second blue and I'm spreading this throughout the sky. And I'm not adding this colour everywhere, I'm leaving some areas white so that this gives the look of fluffy clouds. And when I'm painting in this blue in the sky, I'm just doing a tapping motion. And once again, because the paper is wet, the colour will bleed out and bleed into the white areas to give a really nice soft look. I'm also using a bit of Payne's grey in with the blue so that I can get in some shadows, and I'm just darkening up the top of the sea and also a couple of areas on the sky just to add a bit of variety to the colours and a bit more contrast. And now I'm going in with a bit more of that blue and I'm using the blue that I used for the sky just to add some shadows and details to the water. Now, if you want to lift up any highlights, you can do this with a clean, damp brush like I'm doing here. And I'm using this technique to smooth out the line for the sea, so the shape of the sea. And I'm also using it to create some nice fluffy clouds. You can also use it to add a bit of detail to the sea as well. But for this technique, make sure that you're using a clean, damp brush, and it will lift up the watercolour as long as the watercolour is still wet. Now that we've finished that area, it's time to move on to painting in the sand. And I'm only using two colours for this. I'm using yellow ochre and a bit of burnt umber. But really you can just use a yellow and a brown and mix in a bit of water. And I'm just taking my brush and I'm adding a nice wash of this wherever I can see sand in the reference photo. I'm starting off nice and light and then I'm going to go in with a bit more of the brown and tap in a few shadows using my water brush pen. With the reference, the sand was very bumpy, so there was a lot of shadows, and I'm doing this technique whilst the first wash that we added to the sand is still wet so that we don't get any harsh edges. Keep building up more and more shadows until you're happy with how your sand looks and until you've got a nice contrast and a nice texture to the sand. And once you've done that, it's time to move on to getting in the grassy area. And I'm just using some of the sap green, but any green will do, a bit of brown so it's not so vibrant, and some water mixed in. And once again, I just spread that over all of the areas where you can see grass in the reference. I'm taking my brush pen and I'm just doing a few little lines to indicate the direction the grass is going in each area. But really I'm going to be working on the details in a minute. I just want to establish where the grass is and how long it is, and the way it's curved and the way it's blowing, so the direction it's going in. And so now I'm going to go in and build up even more of those details. I mixed in some more brown because I'm now building up to those darker shadows and getting in some darker details. And when I'm doing the grass, I'm just going in lines, and I'm using a really small round paintbrush for this so that I can get in these tiny details. And there's also a couple of trees that I'm going to get in, and I'm going to be using a sponge to actually show you how you can do foliage. But before I go through that technique, if you want to see how I created this painting in real time, then it is available over on my Patreon, along with over 300 other real-time tutorials for lots of different mediums. For a small amount per month, you can get access to all of these tutorials, as well as the references, sketch outlines, and materials list that you'll need to follow along. But if a monthly membership isn't right for you, or you just want to focus on one specific medium or subject matter, then over on my website I've got lots of individual courses that will teach you all of the techniques that you need to know to master your specific medium or subject matter that you want to learn. I've got a couple of watercolor courses on there, and I recommend checking out the Expressive Animals in Watercolor course, because I go through a lot of really cool techniques in this course, and I go through some interesting expressive techniques as well. So if you are interested in my courses, then I'm currently offering a 15% off code if you use the code SAVE15 at checkout. So I'll leave a link to my Patreon and my website in the description below. But let's get back to the painting. And like I said, I am going to be using a sponge to actually paint in my foliage on my trees. And I just simply get some of the paint onto the sponge and I tap it wherever I want the foliage to be. And if you have very little paint on your sponge, then you'll get really tiny dots. And the more paint you have on your sponge, the bigger your sort of splodges will be. So it creates a really nice variety, and it's a very quick way to paint in the trees as well. And I use that technique for both trees. So we've got a tree on the left hand side, and then we'll have another tree over on the right hand side. And now I'm just going through the process of building up more and more details, and I slowly get darker and darker. I like to work in multiple layers and multiple washes and slowly get darker. It's very easy to go in straight away with really dark paint and it just to be too dark and not have a good enough contrast. So that's why I like to start off light and then add in some darker details. I'm also making sure to add some details overlapping onto the sea to help give a more natural look to the grass. Because in reality there will be bits of grass that will be overlapping onto the sea. And I do like to make sure that you can see bits of the lighter colours in between from previous washes, so I'm not adding the darker paint everywhere. Once again, I'm repeating this sponge technique with the other tree, and I do go in with my paintbrush after and just tweak anything just to make sure the shape is perfect and I'm happy with it. It does a really good job at giving a nice expressive look to those trees. The next thing that I'm doing is I'm using a clean damp brush to pull up some highlights, and this is really good to do if you've gone a bit too dark and you want to create some more highlights. So if you just go in with a clean damp brush whilst the paint's still wet, you should be able to lift up some of that watercolour to create some highlights. Or another way that you can create highlights is using some white gouache. I use the one by Winsor & Newton in the shade Permanent White, and I'm just going to take that gouache and use it to brighten up some clouds in the sky and create some fluffy clouds. And you can also use it to add highlights to the trees or to add some details to the grass. This time is just about now tweaking anything and making sure you're happy with the shadows. I'm adding some more shadows to the sand, and like I said, I'm going to go in with the gouache and just add a few highlights to the tall grass in the front of the painting. You can then glaze over a light green to make sure that the highlights aren't bright white, to make sure they look more realistic. But that is it for this painting. I really hope you enjoyed the tutorial. Let me know if you're going to test this out for yourself and give it a go. Here is the final painting, and I just finished off by removing the tape once the painting had dried and going in and dating the painting. But that is it for this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe if you're new around here, and even tick that bell icon so you do get notified on my future videos. But that is it from me, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye everybody.